Today we have another truly puzzling story. On one hand, its causes seem obvious, but on the other hand, many strange details prevent us from putting the full picture together. The hair found in the stomach of one of the victims, the broken radio, and the inexplicable pool of blood, all of these shroud the incident in a dense fog of mysteries. But let's go step by step. It was the year 1990. A group of experienced climbers headed to Mount Elbrus. 6 people, led by Sergei Levin. Among the members were also Dr. Sergei Forbstein, Oleg Buldakov, as well as Odintsov, Voronin, and Lazarev. They were not novices, but professionals with extensive experience. Levin and Forbstein were mountaineering masters. Moreover, Forbstein had already fulfilled the requirements for the master title. Their goals for the trip to Elbrus were twofold. First, the team participated in a tourist rally as part of a group of Leningrad tourists. As experienced rescuers, they were assigned as a backup group in case of emergencies, since they had already participated in rescue operations in Tian Shan and the Caucasus. Second, the climbers were preparing for a more challenging route in the Pamirs, which they planned to tackle the following season. Elbrus was a warm-up for them before their high-altitude challenges. Interestingly, their future route in the Pamirs was supposed to include search operations. They planned to find the group of Kloshkov, which had disappeared under mysterious circumstances the year before. So on May 2nd, the group had already been on Elbrus for 3 days and had settled in Shelter 11. From there, they decided to embark on an acclimatization outing. Remember, you can't just ascend to high altitudes without preparation. The body needs time to adapt to the lower oxygen levels and atmospheric pressure, or altitude sickness can develop. Acclimatization trips serve this very purpose. Climbers ascend to a certain height, then descend to allow their bodies to adjust to the conditions. Levin's group followed this plan. At 2:30 p.m., they met another group descending. After exchanging a few words, Levin said their group would ascend 1 or 2 more stages and then begin descending. This was at an altitude of 4,500 meters, serious but not critical for experienced climbers. They had already ascended Elbrus in peaks higher than 6,000 meters in the Pamirs. After walking for about 40 more minutes, the group decided to rest. It was at this moment that the weather took a turn for the worse. A strong wind began, and everything was engulfed in thick fog. Visibility dropped to almost zero. Understanding the danger, Levin decided not to take any risks and halted the ascent. However, even descending became impossible due to poor visibility. The decision was made to dig a snow cave and wait out the bad weather. This is not uncommon for climbers. They usually do not take tents on such short trips, and digging a snow shelter is a standard practice. Moreover, Levin likely saw this as an opportunity to train the team before their expedition to the Pamirs. The group communicated their decision to the base camp via radio. They spent the night of May 2nd to 3rd in the snow cave. For experienced athletes, this was certainly an unpleasant situation, but not life-threatening. However, the weather worsened the next morning. Strong winds of up to 30 meters per second, temperatures around zero, and high humidity created extremely difficult conditions. The group tried to begin their descent, but was soon forced to return to the cave. Levin deemed the descent too dangerous under such conditions. During the descent, Forbstein fell twice, which may have been due to a deterioration in his health. He had vision problems, and in the fog and rain, his glasses almost completely impaired his sight. The cave, which initially had 2 chambers, collapsed, and the climbers were forced to crowd into one. The group also noticed 2 Japanese climbers on the slope who couldn't descend either. Levin decided to shelter them in his cave, as otherwise they might have died. At high altitudes, without sufficient supplies, food and oxygen quickly run out, and physical and psychological conditions deteriorate. Despite this, the group continued to reassure the base camp, claiming everything was fine. Perhaps stubbornness played a role. Levin, the head of the rescue team, did not want to ask for help. However, in the evening, communication was lost, and Levin left a troubling message: "We are relying on the support group." This was the first sign that things were really going badly. Rescue teams attempted to search for them, but in the blizzard and fog, they couldn't locate the cave. The night of May 4th became fatal. In the morning, Odintsov, the only one still conscious, emerged from the snow-covered cave and saw the bodies of 3 companions. 2 of the remaining members were unconscious, and 1 of the Japanese climbers was missing. However, the second Japanese climber was still conscious. Odintsov realized that if he didn't start descending, he would die too. Gathering his remaining strength, he started moving down. Fortunately, a rescue team of climbers, who were searching for the Japanese climbers, was coming toward him. He showed them the location of the cave. The rescue operations began. The rescuers started lowering Oleg Buldakov, but soon discovered he had no pulse and was not breathing. Sergei Forbstein was lowered to Shelter 11, where he died from hypothermia without regaining consciousness. Only Odintsov and the remaining Japanese climbers survived. The second Japanese climber was found nearby, frozen in a crevasse. This was, seemingly, a tragic but not unique case for the mountains. Such incidents happen with climbers who knowingly accept these risks. However, in this case, there are many unexplained details that make one think. Here is the first strange fact: the radio that the group had was broken, and not accidentally, but seemingly intentionally. The second curious point: some equipment was missing, mostly expensive and rare items. For example, Forbstein's imported carabiner and adjustable ski poles were gone. Sergei Levin's poles were also missing. However, one could assume that the rescuers might have taken some of the equipment. But an even stranger fact is that the group had 52 ice anchors. This is a lot. Furthermore, for the route the Levin group was following, such anchors were not necessary at all. Why would they take 52? This raises several theories. The first, the group planned a very difficult route that was not announced. The second version, the group participated in unknown rescue operations, which they did not report. And the third, in my opinion, the most likely theory, the group was exchanging these titanium ice anchors with foreigners for other items of equipment that were inaccessible to them. For example, for high-quality mountaineering boots or other rare items they couldn't buy in the Soviet Union. Soviet titanium was valuable to Western climbers who could recycle it to create lightweight and high-quality equipment. This could have been an exchange where the ice anchors were swapped for useful items. However, the question remains, why take 52 ice anchors for an acclimatization sortie? Another strange detail, a puddle of blood was found in the cave. Whether this was related to Buldakov's injury or possibly someone poisoning themselves and vomiting blood remains a mystery. And perhaps the most horrifying detail, in the stomach of one of the deceased, forensic experts found hair from one of the group members. How it ended up there is unclear. Moreover, the deceased climbers were without shoes, without down jackets, or had their pants only partially on. Ice formations on their faces indicated that they, while alive, had lain on the snow for a long time. Meanwhile, not far from Levin's group, just above Shelter 11, there was a group of novice tourists with regular tents. These tourists, despite being frozen, waited out the bad weather without serious injuries. However, despite all the oddities, the forensic examination concluded that the cause of death for the climbers was hypothermia. Of course, it is hard to argue with this, but what caused such hypothermia? Why did a well-prepared and experienced group of climbers die in what seemed like a simple situation, not even on an ascent, but on an acclimatization sortie? What was the cause of the tragedy? Naturally, there are many theories. One of the most popular suggests that Forbstein, being a doctor, used certain medications to improve acclimatization, but they didn't work. However, there is no evidence to support this theory. The fact that Levin didn't report all the information to Shelter 11, however, is clear. But why speculate when 2 people survived? The Japanese climber might not have been able to speak due to a language barrier, but Odintsov was alive and could have shared what happened in that snow cave. Another strange detail. After the descent, many climbers noticed how Leonid Ibril pulled Odintsov aside and talked to him for a long time. After this, Odintsov significantly changed his testimony. And as I mentioned, there are numerous theories about what happened to the group. Here's one version that seems quite logical to me. It became hard to breathe in the cave, and the 3 climbers ventured outside. They were hit by a cold wind, and the temperature dropped significantly at night. After a warm cyclone, cold, clear weather arrived. Their physical and mental state had already been weakened by the cold and lack of oxygen, and their actions became erratic. There is a phenomenon known as paradoxical undressing, where a freezing person feels intense heat and starts removing their clothing. Afterward, poor circulation and the failure of limbs lead to death. One must not forget hypoxia, which also disrupts behavioral adequacy. Additionally, the group seemed to suffer from heat exhaustion, where the body becomes extremely fatigued from the cold and can no longer fight it. Perhaps the participants' clothing had already become wet and no longer protected them from the cold. When you combine all these factors, the death near the cave ceases to seem so mysterious and mystical. To escape the wind, they lay down on the snow, and ice formations gathered around their faces. They fell asleep and never woke up, consumed by the cold. Inside the cave, there was no wind, but it was extremely difficult to breathe. One of the Japanese climbers, crawling outside, decided to descend to Shelter 11, but on the way, he fell into a crevasse and died. After his departure, a hole appeared in the cave through which fresh air began to enter, allowing Odintsov to regain consciousness. Perhaps it was this Japanese climber who saved the two remaining people. But let's examine the factors that played a role in this tragedy. There wasn't just one, but many. First, the sudden change in weather conditions. Strong winds with a blizzard and temperatures near zero created very high humidity and frost, which was difficult to endure. Second, the insufficient acclimatization of the group for prolonged exposure at an altitude of 4,500 meters. They had only spent 3 days in the mountains and, of course, had not acclimatized properly. It's likely that they succumbed to mountain sickness at such an altitude, with Forbstein suffering the most. The third factor was the dampening of their clothing. The tourists were wearing down jackets designed for cold weather, but positive temperatures and prolonged stay in the cave caused their jackets to get wet. It's important to consider that in the 1990s, down did not have the modern water-repellent coating, so it could absorb moisture from both sweat and condensation in the cave. Wet down lost its insulating properties and stopped providing warmth. Their down jackets essentially became wet rags. The fifth factor was the time spent in the cave. This was probably the most significant factor that heavily influenced the situation. People with poor acclimatization were in a small, cramped space at a high altitude where many people were crowded together. Breathing became difficult, and when one of the chambers of the cave collapsed, everyone was squeezed into a small space, likely exhausting all the oxygen quickly. Mountain sickness and the additional lack of oxygen contributed to severe hypoxia. It developed rapidly and greatly impacted their minds, effectively driving them insane. In addition, they could barely move inside the cave, which contributed to frostbite in their limbs. In an attempt to warm up, they started a Primus stove, which further consumed the remaining oxygen. Carbon dioxide and carbon monoxide accumulated in the cave. Old gasoline stoves were lit with dry alcohol, and the burning of erythropin in an oxygen-deprived atmosphere released poisonous cyanide gas. The cave had ventilation through only one entrance, which was often blocked by snow. All these factors, mountain sickness, wet clothing, poisonous gases in the cave, and heat exhaustion, greatly weakened the climbers. Losing their sanity, they exited the cave hoping to inhale even a drop of oxygen, which was almost non-existent at an altitude of 4,500 meters. They were hit by hurricane-force winds, reaching speeds of 30 meters per second. Their minds left them. Some ripped their own skin, some smashed the radio against rocks, and others began eating their comrades' hair. The last Japanese climber, still conscious, decided to take the risk and start descending. He perished, but left an opening for oxygen in the cave, which saved the second Japanese climber and Odintsov. But as I've mentioned, there are numerous versions of what happened to Levin's group and many unexplained and mysterious details. Share your version in the comments. I'd be happy to read it. Don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel.